Welcome, everybody. It is Thursday, September 13th, 2018. It is the Kubernetes SIG Architecture meeting. I'm your co-chair, Jay Singer-Dumars, and the other chair is Brian Grant, who will be joining us momentarily. And we're going to be going through the agenda, which is located at bit.ly/sig-architecture. And first thing we want to do is go through the housekeeping, which there really isn't any. And just for those maybe new to the call or don't know what we do, but essentially we have a series of project boards available under the Kubernetes SIG's repo, or Kubernetes SIG's org for architecture-tracking. It's the name of the board, repos. So you can go there and look at sort of the in-flight things that we have going. We track conformance tests, KEPs that are in flight, and API reviews. And we try and keep those updated. And there's a mention in the agenda basically that this job of maintaining these boards is getting a bit onerous for one person, namely myself. So we're going to be looking at automation for those. So if anybody's interested in talking to me about helping with the automation project there, I would definitely welcome that. So moving right along, cloud provider repos, there's a discussion about this going in the forums. Caleb Miles, are you on this call? I'm scrolling through the list to see if Caleb's on. And it's not looking like it. Brian, do you have any updates on this? I wasn't sure what was outstanding.
I'm Jago McLeod. I'm one of the SIG leads for SIG Cloud Provider and may be able to provide some context. We had ongoing discussion in the working group before it became a SIG and then later in the SIG about where and how to host cloud provider repositories. The overarching goal is to reduce the sense that there are multiple tiers of cloud provider, those that are endorsed in some way by the Kubernetes project, and those that are not. And for historical context, the original 7 cloud providers ended up in tree because that's all we had at the time. And then we shut the door on new cloud providers and invented a mechanism for external cloud providers to be out of tree. All of the original 7 are still in the Kubernetes code base. And there are efforts underway across all of them to extract those. And there are benefits to doing this, not waiting for open source Kubernetes to cut a new release to change or fix something that is cloud specific, for example. The discussion that we had in the cloud provider SIG was around what we don't want every 2-person company to be providing cloud providers in the Kubernetes org. And so we discussed some criteria about the amount of support that it would need to demonstrate in documentation. And discussion since then has been around documentation. That was done in the open in GitHub. And there was discussion at that time about it being difficult for current in-tree cloud providers to move into a completely different org and repo outside of that. And so the compromise we came up with is, at least as an interim step, to have some strict criteria by which external cloud providers need to demonstrate commitment, and that we would create repos in the Kubernetes org for those cloud providers that do so. So that brings us up to current state, at which point now we have Kubernetes SIGs, and some of these kinds of projects end up in Kubernetes SIGs. I think it's reasonable to have that as a second step after this phase. But I think we're looking at, I don't know, a year probably before all current in-tree cloud providers are able to do that migration. And so looking at another year where there is the potential for a perceived distinction between classes of cloud providers.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So moving any existing cloud providers out of Kubernetes to somewhere else falls under the longstanding grandfather clause of if it was in Kubernetes, then it can be in the Kubernetes org. Are we adding new cloud providers at this stage that are not among those in the original 7?
That is the proposal, is that to create parity between the in-tree cloud providers, which moved from Kubernetes to Kubernetes cloud provider XYZ, and create corresponding repositories for external cloud providers to be included in that group equally.
And is the set of criteria for inclusion in that set short enough that you can just rattle them off right now?
It is essentially multiple people to maintain it, and some date at which if you don't submit a patch, then you get kicked out.
By maintaining,
documentation.
You mentioned documentation, assuming also passing conformance tests and actually submitting test results through the federated testing mechanisms or some other mechanism?
I don't remember if that was a phase 1 requirement or an aspirational goal for in the future. But we did discuss that as a requirement. I think OpenStack is doing it now, and DigitalOcean is working on it. Maybe again, there are benefits to doing that, so we don't think we need the stick on that. To become aware that some change breaks your cloud provider is motivational incentive.
Okay, so originally we had, well, I don't know about originally, but a long time ago we had a table in the documentation in the so-called Getting Started Guide section, which listed not just the ones that had cloud provider definition implementations according to the definition that we're talking about, but also cube up support.
Yeah, it's choose a solution page or something.
Exactly.
And it's a total mess, and the docs SIG is working on improving that.
So
being included in that requires that you meet these documentation structure and content guidelines in the reboot of that page.
Okay, so I was going to ask, does this have any relation to that?
Yes.
Okay.
It is the same documentation will get you both on the picking a solution page, and the intention or discussion so far has been around that also being the criteria for getting being included in the repository in the Kubernetes org.
Okay, yeah. So I think this is following the intent of longstanding goals of getting cloud provider specific functionality, whether it's in the so-called cloud provider API or in volume source implementations out of Kubernetes, both so that we don't block people. Like literally we had blocked some cloud providers for months, and then eventually we came back and just said, no, we're actually never merging your support because we're deprecating this and moving to a different thing. So, that's really not a great experience for anybody. And it did become really hard to maintain. And since we didn't have tests or people who were able to even review changes of the in-tree providers, it was just not a good situation for anybody. So I'm supportive of this change. I think it's a super important step, and anything that we can do to unblock it, we should do as part of this gradual evolution in putting down Kubernetes.
So this is Tim. On the mailing list, I was arguing that these repos should not go in Kubernetes. They should go in Kubernetes SIGs, not realizing that we had already started the process of moving it out. And even though the existing ones are covered under the grandfather clause, I don't feel like it's fair to new cloud providers as long as we can set an actual rubric for measuring their commitment. I'm not really sure what the rubric should be, but there should be one. And if there is, then I'm fine putting it in Kubernetes.
So I think it's around an SLO of response time and timeliness of applying certain patches. We will take as an action item to send that to the SIG Arch mailing list. And I'm also okay with creating right now a goal as a subsequent phase to move them all out at the same time. I think it's reasonable to take on that extra work in the future if it's useful to get through this phase.
I want to ask: is there a reason to have any class? Is there a reason to have any first-class SIG providers? Like, why?
Do you have that on? Or
I can
just a second. We're going to switch microphones.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is there a reason to have any first-class cloud providers? Why is that?
Long term, no. Short term, there are tactical reasons which make it more feasible for some of the existing cloud providers to move to another part of the Kubernetes org.
Think of it like the staging directory. It's one step in a process.
Yeah, I get that. I just heard discussion of like first and second class. Like I think everybody should be second class.
So I've argued the same thing. I mean, if my KubeCon talk last year basically proposed kicking everybody out of the tree and even out of the release tar, right? That's a pretty major decision that changes sort of the entire operating mode of what we release every quarter. I don't think we're ready to go there yet. There's an issue also around sort of legal concerns about repatriating cloud provider code into non-Kubernetes repositories, where, like, for example, the Google CLA is not the same as the CNCF CLA, even though they are very similar. Can I retroactively get every contributor who's touched code that is in the Google cloud provider to sign the Google CLA for retroactive changes?
And that is the actual concrete reason why it is simply easier to move to the repositories that have been set up today in the Kubernetes org for the existing cloud provider.
Why is the license implied by the org's position?
Let's not discuss the licensing here because we're not lawyers and I don't even believe that what Tim mentioned is really an issue. We'll have to discuss that with people who actually can speak to that.
We have, so Dim's had his hand up and then Brad had his hand up as well. So let's maybe give them the floor for a second. Dim's?
Okay, thank you. So moving from KK to Kubernetes org, we already have a few. And then the new proposal is to bring some additional ones like digital provider somewhere. And the somewhere, I think there was a discussion about should it be under Kubernetes org or Kubernetes SIGs. So the point there was if we bring the new ones like digital provider into DigitalOcean into Kubernetes SIGs, then we are setting up two different classes because there are some cloud providers in Kubernetes org, some in Kubernetes SIG. So I think to be fair to everyone, what we should be doing is move all the cloud providers into Kubernetes SIGs eventually. Tim, you.
So I think that is exactly what we are deciding, right?
Okay.
We'll allow DigitalOcean, et cetera, into Kubernetes today based on the rubric to be decided by SIG cloud provider. And a possible eventual state would be to move them all to a different organization, whether that's Kubernetes SIGs or Kubernetes cloud providers or something else.
Yeah, that's a fair solution.
It's possible, but yeah, it's going to depend on priorities more than anything else.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that we should, right now, it's just the OpenStack cloud provider, which is like works well, external cloud provider. So I think we should move right now to everybody to Kubernetes SIGs. We don't need to bring everybody into Kubernetes org and then move it to Kubernetes cloud provider or something like that.
Brad, if you want to.
How about if we take this back to the cloud provider? No, I think not everyone who has an opinion on this is here, but we understand the goal to be that we all end up in Kubernetes SIGs. We also understand there's additional work to move twice and potentially issues with discoverability and dead links and all kinds of things. So we will take this back, and understanding that that is the eventual goal, we will debate the best way to get there with the agreement of this group that we can have an incremental step if that is necessary. Is that a good summary?
Discoverability, I think we should have a separate discussion about that, because I think there are things that we can do to organize repositories both within the Kubernetes org and within the Kubernetes SIG org that we're not currently taking advantage of.
Agreed.
And Kubernetes, and there are pros and cons because the Kubernetes org has 100 repos or whatever, so arguably they're more discoverable in an org with fewer repos, even in the absence of some organizational mechanism.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree, and Caleb bent my ear about other companies, projects, things have orgs with thousands of repos, and they don't need to subset those repos into other orgs.
I actually disagree with.
So I think it's
that
a
particular
conversation. It's a
thing,
conversation
but
to have, and I have feelings about what Kubernetes SIGs is for, and this doesn't fit under my general thinking. So it's a separate conversation. But I agree we should do it in 2 steps. I think it's worth it.
So I definitely want to give Brad the floor. He's been waiting for a really long time to speak. So
yeah, just an update on this topic from the SIG doc maintainer view of the same issue. One of the problems we had, and I don't know how many people know, we're doing a restructuring of the doc content, and you've got the in-cloud, you've got the in-tree providers or what have you, and the navigation's a mess. And at the same time, we had several folks wanting to update their offerings. A lot of people have changed their names from an IBM, from a container service offering to a Kubernetes service offering. I think there were at least 3 different folks that have changed their names to highlight the fact that they're Kubernetes, which is really nice. So what we did is a compromise because we had all these issues, and we're coming back with an answer that says, well, we're restructuring the docs, so hold off. But at the same time, many of the offerings were like, I really want to update the information about my offering and my Kubernetes offering. What we resolved to do was use the picking the right solution page as sort of at least the one page that we were trying to keep up to date with the updated information about all the different Kubernetes offerings from the vendors. So at least there was one page that was like a record of truth while all this restructuring goes on in both the doc navigation and what have you. So I just want to let people know that's what we were doing as these requests came in for wanting to do updates despite being in all the flux that I think a lot of you all covered very well.
thanks, Brad. Dims, you wanted to add one last thing?
I think, yeah, it's fine. If everybody here agrees that we can move things to Kubernetes GitHub repo and then move everybody out together, that works fine too.
So, Dims, can you post the links to wherever we need to officially respond in the notes?
Yeah, I'll find it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm putting a spot in there right now for you, Dims. Okay, moving along in the agenda. Just a quick, please take a note in the agenda about Stephen Augustus has a update to the KEPS process, and just everybody, if you could just take a look at that and give your 2 cents, that'd be great.
Yeah, just to quickly add on that, it's basically the stuff we discussed previously in this meeting and in email threads and in issues about moving the KEPS and reorganizing KEPS and design proposals and unifying KEPS and feature process and things like that. It's a really, really short KEP. It's a quick read. It's a few bullet lists. So take a look. It's not like a really long, complicated change.
Yeah. Then we had a discussion about FeatureGate and the deprecation policy for alpha FeatureGates. There's a document here that's been in progress and needs review. I don't necessarily think we need to review this in this meeting, but I believe it is something that needs some eyes on it.
Yeah, actually, one thing I would like to do, we haven't really got the KEP or API review processes moving, and the conformance reviews so far have just been a couple people doing them. But I think one thing that may help is actually assigning owners to some of these things to like make somebody responsible for pushing it over the finish line. So does anybody feel passionately about the AlphaGate issue that would be willing to volunteer to pick it up and sort of drive it to closure? I think the people who might be passionate about it are not here today. So,
I think that's right, actually.
So
We can put that on the mailing list, or we can actually, I'll do it in Slack, and we'll just put a note there. Somebody needs to claim this, or it's simply not going to move forward.
could you do it by mailing list? Like, I just can't. I poll Slack roughly once a week. So.
Okay. Mailing list it is.
Thanks.
Lastly, there is a comment regarding the profiles for conformance. Brad, if you're still on the call, he had raised the concern basically that there's some consternation between the CNCF view of the testing and what we're trying to do with profiles. And I think Brad just wanted some clarification on why we're looking at profiles and what the purpose is, and what ways it skews from the notion of conformance as the CNCF sees it.
Yeah, both Aaron Krickenberger and Timothy Sinclair couldn't attend today, so I pushed it to next week.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
And confirmed with Brad that that was okay. So.
Okay, great. Then super easy. Fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah, I figured those are the people that would be most apt to talk about it. Okay, thanks for doing that. Then we are officially out of agenda items. Just a quick public service announcement. Be a good citizen and involve yourself in the election process for the steering committee. So that's coming up next week. Will be the votes. Will be sent out for the CIVs voting process. So please do vote. We have some really great candidates. DIMS is one of those great candidates. So let's definitely get out there and get our next wave of leaders installed. So anybody else have any other items that we want to cover before we adjourn?
Or to put on future agendas. We don't get a lot of people putting things on future agendas, except for people who get blocked in email threads, dropping things on at the very last minute. If you can put things on more proactively earlier, planning ahead for things not getting resolved in email, or just if you want to get more input from more people than usual suspects, definitely feel free to try to get things on the agenda. I think the doc is at least writable or at least commentable by architecture. So
yeah, anybody can edit it. So the corollary to that too is, and this is something I think we need to be a bit more strict on, is that if there are no agenda items, say a day before the meeting, we're going to cancel the meeting, because I don't like having things get dropped in the last minute and people don't have time to review them. So it's really inefficient. So like there's a 24-hour window there where if there's nothing in the agenda, then there's a very high likelihood of canceling the meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Plus one of that.
For SIG API machinery, I actually have a calendar entry the day before that says the agenda closes now.
That's good.
I don't know. We haven't always taken it seriously, but like we canceled the last one because there wasn't anything on the agenda.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay, great, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.
Cool.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.